Hello, and welcome to the latest in our discussions about Europe's blue economy, the use of its seas, and the challenge of ensuring that the economic opportunities they offer go hand in hand with the principles of sustainability. I'm Chris Davies, a former long-standing member of the European Parliament's Environment Committee and a senior advisor these days to Pedersen Public Affairs in Brussels. Now, with me today, and representing the European Commission, is Bernhard Friess, a man who has played a lead role in drafting the communication, the overview, if you like, that was adopted by commissioners in Brussels last month. The Blue Economy communication covers just so many topics that we're spoiled for choice as to which to discuss. To help us this time, I'm joined by Sotiris Raptis, Director of Maritime Safety and the Environment with the European Community Shipowners Association, and by John Maggs of the environmental NGO Seas at Risk. But first, a word from François-Régis Mouton, European Affairs Director of the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, which is sponsoring this webinar. And François, your industry must be hugely interested in the blue economy debate, not least because you're becoming a major investor in wind farms, isn't that right?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much for your kind intro, Chris, and always a pleasure to follow you wherever you are in the European Parliament or now with Ruud Pedersen. In the last 80 years, we have been investing in oil and gas, and 50 years in offshore, in particular in North Sea. And today for Ocean Day, we will focus on the blue economy itself, pick up on the discussion after the publication of the strategy on May 17. And it's a great pleasure to see that we have been joined by experts to this webinar. And the Commission made it clear, Chris, a blue economy will be a key element to deliver on both the recovery plan and the European Green Deal. The oil and gas industry, as I said, has been a major actor in blue economy offshore the past 50 years. And in Europe, for instance, 80% of oil and gas production takes place offshore. And we sustain a massive supply chain of hundreds of thousands of jobs. Our companies have to carry out a broad range of ecological assessment to characterize and monitor the environments in which they operate. This gives us access to a huge amount of data for ocean science, and we actively share these data with a number of research organizations and institutions. We are also sponsoring important joint industry projects in biodiversity, for instance. It is our duty to do so because we are in a privileged position to contribute to marine knowledge. Oceans and seas hold the key to Europe's decarbonization efforts. Our industry's role in that regard is fourfold, and we do so by first reducing our operational emissions through electrification of platform, for example. Two, supply a cleaner energy, in particular for maritime transport, and LNG is leading the way. Three is continuing to raise our investment in offshore wind energy. And this is why I would say, Chris, not only it was so important for our industry in the past, but it will become more and more important in the future, including in wind energy. And fourth, repurposing our offshore platforms, pipelines and depleted reservoir to store or transport CO2 capture from onshore industrial sites. Today, there are 51 CCUS projects in the pipe in Europe, and many of these will store the captured CO2 offshore in around 10 depleted oil and gas fields. This is why we're about to publish a study called Restream that will look specifically at the state of play of offshore pipeline, be them onshore and offshore, be them oil or gas, and their repurposing potential to store CO2 offshore. And by the way, just an anecdote, since you put me on the spot, but for your information, we invest 10 times more in wind energy than in CCS in 2021. So both technology for us is very important, but contrary to what you would expect, wind energy is of course even more important for our industry. Let's insist on this point. Ocean hold the key to Europe climate neutrality. They will produce renewable energy for those living on land and store the onshore emissions that cannot be cancelled due to technical or economic reasons. It's therefore very important that the Green Deal and the Blue Economy strategy in particular drives synergy between the maritime and the industrial sectors. As long-term users of the marine environment, we consider it is our duty to accompany the smooth transformation of the European blue economy to help Europe reach climate neutrality. So thank you again for joining the discussion today. And thanks again, Chris, for being such a good moderator as usual.
It's a bit early to say that, but thank you, François-Régis, not least because you raised a point about carbon capture or CO2 storage, because there's no actual mention of that in the Blue Economy communication. Maybe we'll discuss that at some point. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Let me turn to Bernhard Friess. Bernhard, I introduced you as the man who has led the way in bringing this communication together within the Commission. It starts off by making reference to the Green Deal, the aspirations of building a competitive yet sustainable economy with net zero emission of greenhouse gases. And let me quote, "The blue economy," it says, "can become a font of action and ideas, creating innovation, spurring lasting recovery, and protecting our planet." I mean, the aspirations are really high, aren't they? And delivering on them is going to be very much more difficult.
Yes, thanks, Chris. In a way, yes, but perhaps I should start by just trying to explain our starting point, because one thing we have done in this new policy is to try to.
I do apologise, but someone has got some background noise, or we're getting it in from an outside source. If anyone knows of any background noise, can you mute yourself? But Bernhard, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. We changed our vantage point. In the past, we started from the economic side, from the economy. We looked at the growth potential. This time, we start from the ocean. And we start from the ocean, and we ask how to preserve our ocean for our children, and then how to make this an economic story and economic success. And that's very important, and it's something that will go through the whole policy and the whole communication. Just to give you two figures, you all know them, so I'm preaching to the converted. 80% of all life forms are in our oceans. What we lose there, we lose forever. 40% of all European Union citizens live in coastal areas. So whatever happens, sea level rise, extreme weather events, will affect not only people, but will affect the economic backbone of much of our economy, right? So the second point, of course, is then to see, look, how can we make this transition to a sustainable economy, and how can we make the transition that is set out in President von der Leyen's European Green Deal? And the thing goes two ways. We believe without this fundamental transition, we can't actually save our oceans, and we need to. But also the other way around, the European Green Deal is not going to work without the blue, without the ocean. So no green without the blue. So we need to really address the big issues we have in our seas and waters, and by the way, in the whole water system, which are the effects of climate change, which is pollution, all forms of pollution, from plastic to emissions from ships, to agricultural inflow into seas, to chemicals, and the destruction of ecosystems that is still happening and actually still accelerating in some areas. And I'm sure we're going to speak about that later. And what this communication does is for the first time put together a really comprehensive agenda how we can do that. So bring together all strands of European Union Commission policies in one more, what we try to make a coherent policy. Now, there's one important point I'd like to make at the beginning, and that is it goes like a seesaw. It goes in both directions. We need to start doing less bad, if I'm allowed to call it like that. We need to decarbonize. We need to depollute. And so those activities that at the moment still have externalities, have harmful effects on the oceans, they need to scale down. We just heard the François, a representative of the oil and gas industry. Part of the story is that industry needs to commit to retiring, basically, the fossil fuel resources that are out there, that are under the seabed. Without that, we will not reach our targets, we will not reach our climate targets. There will be no European Green Deal. And the other side is that we need to build up those who can replace these activities. So that's, of course, as you know, offshore renewables. By 2050, if the European Green Deal is going to be a success, we estimate that 25% of all energy needs to be renewable from offshore, simply because there's not enough space on land to do that. So that's huge. That's a huge challenge. But we can't do the second without the first. And the second is something that can really create a lot of economic momentum. It can create a perhaps new, more novel model of economic development, no longer the kind of growth-based, but one that is circular, and one that creates a lot of job and that actually can establish Europe as an innovation leader. Yeah? There's a really good technologies and cleaner technologies, including in shipping, by the way. I think we're going to come to that, that can take us forward. Or take plastic, right? I mean, plastic is endemic in the oceans, but we can actually replace plastic, but we need to scale down plastic pollution and develop alternatives.
With what's just been said. Sotiris.
Thank you, Chris. And
from the European Shipowners Association.
Nobody can disagree with the main message, but the devil is in the details. And ECSA welcomed the publication of the communication of the new approach on sustainable blue economy. The communication highlights the importance of the contribution of the blue economy to achieve carbon neutrality, and we're fully committed to decarbonizing shipping as soon as possible. Furthermore, we welcome the fact that the Commission aims at promoting the use of EU funds to green maritime transport by increasing the uptake of short sea shipping instead of using more polluting modes, and by promoting the renovation of the EU maritime fleet. We were a bit concerned about the reference to the revision of the ship recycling regulation. The communication makes a reference to an extended scope of a revised regulation, but the thing is that the Commission is planning to kick off an assessment process of the existing regulation, and we found it a bit weird that the Commission has already come up with ideas, concrete ideas, the extended scope before making this evaluation of the current regulation. Talking about concrete, certain policy initiatives referenced by the communication, namely the EU ETS and the Fuel EU. We have come up with a very constructive position.
Sotiris, I'm going to come back on to you. Don't worry. I want to discuss all these points. So let me just turn to John. John, I may have turned your microphone off because there was noise coming in. There was a cross line, I think, on your system. But, so I mean, from what you've just heard from Bernhard, as by way of introduction, I take it Seas at Risk as an environmental NGO thinks this is wonderful. Your microphone is off. Maybe that's my fault.
Hey, yeah.
Oh, great. I've just, one way or another, John has just left the room. That's that could be me. But Bernhard, you just heard from Sotiris putting the points, getting onto some practicalities. Let's make a start on ships, for example, and low emission ships. Now, the communication talks about, I think, having low emission ships by 2030. Now, I think the Scandinavians would say they already have some electric ferries and things in operation. But are we going to have the technology within 9 years to drive a 200,000 ton container ship? Maybe we do have the technology, we just don't have the ships.
Maybe I'll start by giving you a figure, and that is that if you take maritime transport and air transport together, since 1990, we have increased actually emissions by 50%. So it's one area where the trends are going in the wrong direction, and it's almost unique in that. And most trends are going down. Here they're going up. So the short answer to your question is we don't have a choice. Basically, we have to. Actually, what we do here in this policy is to set out a rather, I think, convincing bundle of measures to support this kind of technological change. It is acknowledged that technologies are carbon-free propulsion technologies are market ready, especially in shipping, as they are perhaps in car traffic and car mobility. But there are good technologies out there. There are almost market-ready technologies out there, and they range from wind. You'll be amazed, actually, how advanced wind propulsion, at least as a supplementary propulsion, is for many applications in shipping. They, as you mentioned, Norway, they cover electric, different kinds of fuels, and the infrastructure for these fuels needs to be built. Hydrogen. So there are many technologies that compete and that can complement each other. And as always, you know, in the end, there will be a mix of solutions. But one thing is clear: these solutions need to replace the carbon heavy and in many cases also on other in other ways polluting technologies we have at the moment. So I think it's doable. It's one area where Europe actually can again lead. And whatever we do today in Europe will tap into a global market later on.
I'm going to come back to ships. Oh no, I think we're now joined by John again. Just talking about ships, John. If you're back with us, I know you believe that there's measures that can be taken in the short term to reduce emissions from shipping. Is that correct? Oh, well, I'm gonna leave that discussion to John. We've got you back. Okay,
Chris,
I was just saying.
If it's a problem on my end, I apologise.
No problem. I believe you think there are measures that could be taken in the short term by the shipping industry to reduce emissions. So,
yeah, I mean, I think.
Bernhard has mentioned wind. I've often seen pictures of modern ships with modern wind things, but I've never seen it as a development more than a photo opportunity.
Yeah, well, there are certainly lots of photographs out there, but there are also ships with sails of various kinds, and there's more on the drawing board. So, no, I mean, I think, you know, absolutely. I mean, the issue, I think, regarding shipping and decarbonisation is that there's an awful lot of emphasis on what are called mid and long-term initiatives. So there's a lot of talk about carbon pricing. There's a lot of talk about alternative fuels. And of course, you know, in the longer term, alternative fuels are going to be, you know, absolutely essential. But, you know, to keep warming below 1.5 degrees, and, you know, this is really, really important for lots of parts of the world, including the Arctic, you know, we need to bring those emissions down quite steeply in the short term. And, you know, we're not going to have fuels rolled out on any scale in the short term. And there are other things that the shipping industry can do. Principal amongst them is making their ships more efficient, both with technical fixes like adding sails, but other technologies as well, but also with operational practices. And that's where we come to, you know, well, I mean, it's been a theme of Seas at Risk's work for a long time, but ships basically need to slow down. This is the most, you know, potent way of bringing emissions down quickly in the short term. There's been a little bit of this happen, but there's loads more potential there. And we would like to have seen something a bit more in the strategy about, you know, what you can do in the, you know, in the very near future to make shipping's impact on the climate and other things, you know, greater.
Okay, let me turn. Sotiris, are you there?
Yes.
Well, just can you respond to that? Okay, I mean, John has called for slower ships, increased efficiency. I mean, surely from the ship owner's point of view, that's exactly what you want, isn't it? Increased efficiency, higher profits.
Mm-hmm. Apologies, but my screen went off because of my poor connection. In fact, this is what we want to discuss about the specific policy initiatives under the blue economy communication, namely the EU ETS and the Fuel EU. The Commission will come up with concrete proposals under the Fit for 55 climate package. And we have come up with our answer to our specific proposals on the EU ETS. For instance, we would like to see under the EU ETS the establishment of a fund to facilitate the energy transition of the sector. We would like to see also a phase-in period for the shipping sector. We're fully committed to addressing the climate crisis. And on the Fuel EU Maritime, we also have come up with concrete proposals. And in our contribution to the public consultation of the Commission, we said that a basket of measures, including slow steaming, should be incentivized by the new regulation. We're quite concerned that the Commission will go and introduce a fuel standard, though, as a requirement for ships instead of any other measures. And on that point, we would like to see that a fuel standard that incentivizes the uptake of cleaner fuels, low and zero carbon fuels in the market, should be first of all address the fuel supplier within the EU. We're quite concerned that by introducing a fuel standard on ships worldwide will promote biofuels, raising serious enforcement concerns. We commissioned a study, and we went public with the findings of this study, which confirmed our concerns about promoting biofuels and raising enforcement concerns. There is nothing wrong with biofuel, don't get me wrong, but we need to ensure a level playing field. We need to ensure that the sustainability criteria of the EU are met by all stakeholders in the market. And this is an important message for the Commission to reconsider what they're drafting now in the Fuel EU under the Fit for 55 package.
We hear the message, but tell me, what's the lifetime of a ship? How long do they last?
It depends on the segment. I mean, it can stay at sea up to 30, 35 years.
Okay, so if we're to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, most new ships by 2030 have got to be zero carbon, and at the moment, hardly any are. I mean, there's a dramatic transformation needed in less than a decade. Is it capable of being achieved? I know you've said you're all in favour of the Commission's aspirations, but is it actually capable of being achieved?
I think the critical question here is how we will promote the uptake of new fuels by taking certain policy initiatives. And the real question is if these initiatives can deliver in the next 6, 7, 10 years. Can the Fuel EU deliver in the next 10 years? Can the Fuel EU deliver real emissions savings in the next 10 years? This is the question we're raising with the Commission and the other stakeholders.
What about liquefied natural gas? Would you be using that as an interim or encouraging that?
We go for a technology neutral approach, and we should take into account the sustainability criteria of the EU. As long as they comply with the sustainability criteria of the EU, they should be eligible. They should be part of the solution.
Okay, well, John, you want to come in? Your microphone might be off.
I mean, gas. The oil and gas industry, of course, are promoting gas as a marine, gas as a marine fuel, and this is completely the wrong thing to be doing. In the kind of engines that most large ships are being built with now, kind of gas engines, including upstream emissions, using gas is probably more harmful than just using ordinary, marine fuels. So the answer is quite a straightforward. Gas, no, the industry shouldn't be going anywhere near it, and it should be putting all of its effort. And you certainly shouldn't be building new ships now that are going to have a lifespan of, as Sotiris points out, 30 or maybe more years. Shouldn't be building those now to, with another fossil fuel in mind. So no, there's a really big problem there. But the other thing I wanted to say was that if we, you're right, it's a heavy lift. 10 years. To really turn the whole industry around. But first of all, we don't have an option. That's what we have to do to keep warming, below dangerous levels. So we've got to do it. The second point is that, the industry has been through some pretty amazing transitions itself in the past. We've transitioned from sail to coal, coal to oil. The industry, went from break bulk, where all of the goods were loaded onto ships, manually to containers. These were huge, huge changes for the industry. They managed them, and they managed them in pretty short order as well. So, I don't think there's anything, inherently undoable about, moving to zero emission vessels by 2030. But you've got to have the right policy in place. Putting a price on carbon is absolutely fine, and it's the right thing to do. But, it would be a mistake to think that that's going to drive the change fast enough. There's no evidence of that, not at current carbon prices.
Current carbon prices have gone up dramatically, of course, in the last couple of months.
They're nowhere near it. They're nowhere near it would need to be to make it cost comparable to to put hydrogen or ammonia in your ship. So So, I mean, I think you don't, rely on that at your peril. But for example, a very, very strict 1.5 degree compatible, carbon intensity regulation, there's something like that being discussed at IMO at the moment. The ambition levels in it are way too low. And I know that Europe is pushing to make those more ambitious, but it should really, at the IMO red line, it should say we're not going to go ahead with a short-term measure that has a level of ambition in it that is not consistent with this. Because, if you put that in place, everything will fall into place. Ship owners will have to comply. They'll make their ships more efficient in the short term. They'll slow them down. They'll bolt on new technologies. They'll go for wind, and there'll be a market for new fuels. So you've got to get the regulatory environment right if you want this to happen.
Okay, Bernhard, I know shipping isn't your mainstream subject here, but this is a global business. And if, for example, shipping is to be included within the EU emissions trading system, that means presumably that Chinese Panama registered vessels will have to be buying carbon allowances from the European market. It presumably requires the support of the International Maritime Organization. It's not as though Brussels, or can it? Can Brussels simply snap its fingers and say, we insist upon these standards? Or is it very much dependent upon getting global agreements?
So there's two things, really. The discussion until now has shown it, actually. There's the regulatory side and creating the regulatory framework to incentivize change. And I'm not going to go into the details because you'll have the Fit for 55 package in the college in a month's time. But of course, what's on the table is including maritime transport in the emissions trading system. What will be on the table is removing the tax subsidies for fuel, which is something we've always been asked, and the Commission is going to table a proposal to revise the energy.
Okay, Bernhard's frozen, so waiting for you to come back. Sotiris, the question of liquefied natural gas. Just let me ask. John sort of dismisses this, but if the object is to, if I were a ship owner, and conversion of a huge. Sorry. Your connection's gone, Bernhard. I'm just talking to Sotiris for a moment. If I was a ship owner thinking, right, I'm going to equip a huge container ship with hydrogen technology, even though on paper I know it theoretically works, it's a big investment decision, which must carry risks, isn't it? Doesn't it make more sense for them to go down the liquefied natural gas route as a short-term measure because it's tried and trusted?
We know for sure that low carbon fuels will be part of the solution. But I think the question John raised is really critical. How to make fuels low and zero carbon fuels available in the market? This should be the question of the different regulations that will be put forward in a month period. This is the real question for the EU ETS. Of course, the intention of the regulators is not to reflect all externalities on the carbon price, but the question there is how we'll use the revenues generated to incentivize the uptake of low and zero carbon fuels. Gas and synthetic fuels and biofuels, they will all be part of the solution. But the critical question is how, in the end, the policymakers will create the right regulatory regime for the uptake of zero carbon fuels. And we have proposed there under the EU ETS the creation of a fund to use the revenues generated under the EU ETS to finance the energy transition of the sector.
Yeah. John, would you agree with that before I turn to Bernhard? Sorry, you're on mute again. As I said, we're getting background noise.
Well, yeah, sorry about that. Look, if we're talking about contracts for difference, then i.e., topping up, making the price of the fuels the same artificially, then yes, fine. If we're talking about R&D in the shipping sector generally for zero emission vessels, then I'm not so sure because there's no evidence that actually that's needed. Yes, that's my answer on that point. Contracts for difference, one thing. R&D for funds for general R&D. I don't think there's I mean, this is what, I mean, at the moment, the shipping industry is pushing very, very hard at the IMO to create a fund to put money into, zero emission vessel research and development. But actually, there's no evidence that this is needed. That work is happening already, just through normal commercial, activities. So, but as I say, contracts for difference is a different matter.
Bernhard, I think we have a direct link with you again.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to, I didn't get the whole last part of the debate, but just one further comment. We talked about the long investment cycles in shipbuilding and in shipping, and it's indeed a big issue. I would think that it's very much in the vested interest of the shipping industry to really engage in investing in technologies and in assets today that will not become stranded assets just a few years down the line, because this is otherwise going to happen inevitably. If we just plan for the next few years, come 2030, the picture will be insufficient, and more regulation, I'm sure, will come. So it's something again where especially European ship owners and shipping operators, I think, have an opportunity, I believe, to take the lead. And by the way, what we're talking a lot about here is short sea shipping here in Europe. It's actually inland shipping. Look at the Baltic, look at the North Sea. It's a wonderful playground for actually putting in place new solutions. The most advanced nations, Norway, look at Norway, they're doing it already. So it's something where I believe there's a very strong own interest we have as an industry, not just to play it safe, but actually to invest into the future. And the future, of course, needs to be carbon free.
But the key issue around so many of these things, it seems to me, is to what extent can Brussels, effectively, the institutions in Brussels, make decisions which can then be binding with such a global business? Take, for example, the recycling legislation, which Sotiris raised. I mean, the proposals are that will be enhanced, strengthened. As you know, at the moment, the vast majority of big heavy ships end up at the end of their lives going to Southeast Asia to be broken up on the beaches of Bangladesh. And how do you stop that? I mean, the ship owners are doing that because that's the most economical way for them to get rid of their vessels. How do you legislate to stop that happening?
You're asking me? Wait for the Fit to 55 package, and that it's on the table in July. Look at it, and then I think we should have a debate about that, because you will be surprised and will be interested to see what our global reach can be if these kind of things get enacted into legislation eventually. Indeed.
Great comment, John.
Yeah, just that I think the oh, you can't regulate other people's ship argument is used an awful lot by the industry, and I don't want to. It's hogwash, basically. If ships are trading into your port, then you have an awful lot of control. You have complete sovereignty over your ports. You can have port entry requirements specifying almost anything. Now, of course, doing some things is going to be politically more difficult than others. It's a political issue. It's not a legal one. So you're basically just saying, look, if you want to trade into my port, this is what you have. These are the rules, and you have complete sovereignty over that. So, I mean, I don't mean to downplay the political aspects of that, because of course, if one country or region does it, then there's obviously the possibility, and others don't like it, there's a possibility of retaliatory measures. Other ports, make other countries saying the same thing about entry to their ports. But legally you can do it. You just have to win the political argument. And I think if Europe has gone to the IMO, argued for the global approach, done everything it can, and the rest of the world has blocked that, or actually, in reality, what is small parts of the rest of the world have blocked it, then it has every right to come back home and say, okay, we're going to do this regionally. If you want to come into our ports, these are the rules. It can do that, and I think that's what it should do on this. And for shipbreaking, well, it should. I think if the company is European owned or European flagged, then I don't think there's any problems with having rules to basically say you can't take your ships to Bangladesh.
Thanks, John. I want to move on to fisheries and plastics and other issues. But Sotiris, we were just talking about the ship recycling directive. Why do not more European ship owners ensure that their ships are broken up sustainably in approved yards in Europe? Why do they end up going across to Southeast Asia?
One of the concerns that we have raised regarding the EU list of approved yards is limited capacity, and this is why we need more facilities in the EU list. The situation we're facing currently is really we're really concerned about the fact that yards that have made a tremendous progress over the course of the last 4, 5, 6 years are not included in the EU list. And one of the reasons why the Commission is not including these yards in the EU list is the Basel ban. The Basel ban that entered into force in December 2019. Currently, the Commission, this is the legal interpretation of the Commission, they're not allowed to include ship recycling facilities in the EU list located in non-OECD countries, even if these recycling facilities fully meet the EU criteria. And what we have proposed to the Commission is to launch negotiations with the Indian authorities to reach an agreement, a bilateral agreement with India, so that the Commission, the EU, is allowed to assess these facilities in India and finally include them in the EU list if they meet the EU criteria. We're not saying that these facilities shouldn't be meeting the criteria, but the situation we're facing now is that all these facilities located in non-OECD countries are completely cut off the market. The EU is not able even to assess these applications. So our main message when it comes to the ship recycling regulation to the Commission is launch negotiations with the Indian authorities, conclude an agreement as soon as possible so that you will be able again to assess and finally include these facilities in the EU list.
Thank you. I'm Chris Davies, and we're discussing the communications blue economy. We're discussing the Commission's blue economy communication. And Bernhard Friess here from the European Commission is the man who's played the lead role in drawing it up. And I'm joined also by Sotiris Raptis from the European Community Shipowners Association and by John Maggs from the environmental NGO Seas at Risk. Bernhard, you're a former acting Director General of DG MARE. I'm a former chairman of the European Parliament's Fisheries Committee, so let me turn onto that particular subject, because again, in the communication, you're talking about extending the number of marine protected areas across Europe to cover 30% of the sea, and that's up from about 12%, I think. But presumably, you also want those to be properly protected. Now, you know that there is, because at the moment it's paper protection. The criticism is they're declared, but there's very little to stop harmful fishing activities taking place within them. You know there is very strong resistance from the fishing industry to extending NPAs. How do you overcome that?
Well, first of all, I think we don't have a choice for two reasons. First of all, these are the targets of the European Green Deal politically, but also because we cannot afford to hand down to our children, oceans that are depleted, destroyed, ecologically no longer viable. I think we have had a very, very good track record, as you know, very much from the activity which you just referred to, your own activity, of managing that part of fisheries policy that deals with fish stocks. We've actually managed to grow in some areas fish stocks by 50%. In the area that I've been overseeing for a long time now, the northern waters, that's been the case. That's been the trend over the last 10 years. Much worse, admittedly, in the Mediterranean, where we still are far away from sustainable fishing. What we have done perhaps less well, and what we have to really focus on is to look at the broader environmental impact of fishing. But it's not only fishing; it's many other things as well. It is pollution, it's noise, and we've been discussing about shipping. And your proposal to your idea to slow down boats actually could be a very effective remedy. It's human intervention in terms of tourism and many other human activities in the sea. So what we will do is we will launch hopefully, or we are preparing a big project that is called the Mission Ocean, which will be a initiative, if it is approved by the Commission by mid of the year, that will draw very heavily on the European Union's research and development budget, Horizon Europe, with an amount of up to €1 billion, supplemented by other policies, by other funds, and it will have the objective of mobilizing all the different resources that we can muster, and not just European, but local, regional, national, in the European Union, to try to move us from these 11% protected areas to 30% by 2030, and from the admittedly very few really strictly protected areas to the 10% that we have promised. So that is going to be, again, subject to approval by the college and the process that's still underway. That's something we've been working on very, very hard to scope that plan. I think we have a good draft plan on the table. I think we can actually give it a really, really good shot to get there. And it will involve, no doubt, a completely new way of engaging with very much the level of local initiatives, of regional initiatives. Because of course, what you have to do and what you have to bear in mind is that this is not just an ecological issue. It's an issue of economic and social transition. So you have to move activities from one spot to another, make sure that there are revenues, that it's a bit like getting out of coal. You have to find alternative solutions.
But I'm just reflecting upon my time and working on fisheries issues. Politicians very rarely get involved in them, and the fact is, very few people get into politics because of fish or fisheries. So when you talk about the need to protect our seas and rebuild fish stocks and promote sustainability, then everyone would nod their heads and say, yeah, of course, that's what we should be doing, and practices in the past have been not so good, and we must bring about reform. And yet when practical measures are put forward, they encounter very strong resistance from those people who actually are involved in the fishing industry. And I don't know, I mean, what do you need? You need the engagement of policymakers on a much wider breadth in order to promote this concept of sustainability and overcome the resistance. Because no one is trying to destroy the fishing industry. On the contrary, the object is to ensure the fishing industry has a very successful long-term future. Would you agree?
I would disagree. Actually, I would disagree. I mean, the politicians are very much able and willing to get engaged in these issues. And if I could tell you from the long nights I've spent in the council negotiating fishing quotas, you will see the proof of that. I mean, the fisheries ministers, agriculture ministers are deeply involved in that at a very local level. But I think what we need to do is make the fishing industry, and not only the fishing industry, local communities as our allies. And what we have done in fishery stock management, where fish stocks are much healthier now, actually shows that it's possible, because it actually increases revenue for fishermen. So more you fish sustainably, more you are actually earning from your fisheries with much less ecological environmental impact. So that is a principle I think we need to manage to transfer into other areas. And there's lots of science. There are studies that show that those areas that are really strictly protected actually yield more in terms of fishing income and fishing volumes in adjacent areas, because you create areas where fish stocks can recuperate and recover. So I think this is a transition that has to be done. Now, what the challenge we have today is implementation. The targets are set, so let's not even debate them anymore. They may be very ambitious, they are very ambitious, but we have no choice. What we have to focus on now is implementation. It's actually doing these things. So the ocean mission that I mentioned as a project will be designed together with many other things, together with new environmental legislation, together with advances on our European fisheries policy, together with our LIFE program, with many other European activities, and with many good initiatives on the ground. This is going to be the implementation push.
So, John, and again, your microphone may well be off, but presumably you're from the NGO Seas at Risk. Presumably you will just agree with every single word that Bernhard has just said.
Oh, almost. One or two things, though. I mean, going to your point about, about how you get people to act on fishing. I think one of the problems is people don't think fish are wildlife. There's somehow, it's sort of like, it's like fishing in the fishing industry is sort of like floating around in the sea, but not really part of it. And I think that, so there's an element of education and a mindset change that has to take place. When we talk about, fishing, we're really talking about hunting. We're talking about wild animals in their environment being hunted, and in many cases, to functional extinction. And what's happened with the industry is it's grown from a sustenance, focused artisanal activity into a massive industry that is hoovering up wildlife from the sea and changing it fundamentally. It's the single, along with climate, it's the single biggest threat. So I think there's a mindset issue, and that's kind of people have to take a slightly different perspective, I think, to get to the nub of the problem with fisheries and with ocean health. But you're right to something. I mean, 30 by 30 is a great start. The 30 has to mean something. At the moment, for example, there's more beam trawling in MPAs than there is outside of it. The single most destructive, harmful fishing activity, more of it in marine protected areas than outside of it. How can that possibly make sense? We also know that beam trawling and bottom trawling, globally responsible for as much carbon pollution, so as big an impact on the climate as aviation or shipping. So, a huge source of carbon pollution, massively destructive to the oceans, in MPAs more than it's outside MPAs. There's something wrong here. So, it is an implementation thing, but I think one of the first things we have to do is ban bottom trawling in MPAs, and then move on to how we ban it more widely than that. I mean, this is a key issue, huge impact. If we could do that, if we could stop bottom trawling, the benefits to the oceans and to climate would be enormous.
And I think Bernhard, the Environment Commissioner, has touched upon the fact that there may be restrictions on trawling in certain areas. But again, just building on what John has said, the difficulty is in implementation, is it not? I mean, these MPAs need to be properly protected, not simply have paper protection. And the Commission is so much reliant upon member states to actually introduce rules and enforce them.
I think, first of all, I mean, there are a few cliches that we should not exaggerate. I mean, the distinction between artisanal fishing and large-scale industrial fishing, each has its own problems. In my forensic experience, I've seen many environmental disasters created more by small-scale fishermen than by large-scale fishermen, and so on. So you have to really address every situation as it is. Secondly, you need to make these people your allies. They must be stewards of the sea. You can't treat a certain community as enemies or as adversaries. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And then for every problem there is a solution for sure, but you need to find the right mix. So bottom trawling surely has its significant harmful implications. Other fishing techniques have a mix of them. You have to look at a specific fishery, and you need to find the best solution. And don't forget that the fishing is a big factor. Plastic pollution is as big a factor, probably. Agricultural inflow is an enormous problem. If you look at the Baltic Sea, the decline of fish stocks in the Baltic Sea is no longer because of overfishing. We fixed the fishing problem in the Baltic Sea. And the tragedy is that still fish stocks are going down. Why? Because of eutrophication. So basically nutrients flowing into the water. No more oxygen for the fish to breathe. No more food for them to eat. There's chemicals. So it's really a complex problem. And that's why I think we really need to mobilize every angle, every stakeholder, put a lot of funding into it, put a lot of innovation into it, but also treat our stakeholders as allies. I think that's really important, because what I say it again, what will be needed will be transition. It will be to create alternative revenue streams. So we need to offer something to private investment. No amount of public money can fix the problem. We need private investment. And it basically means that those who may not be able to continue what they're doing today may need to find a living somewhere else, and a better living, hopefully. That's very important. It's very important. Otherwise, no policy, no implementation drive will stick.
Sotiris, let me bring you in and just put in a plea for the fish. I mean, they get no peace. You represent the Shipowners Association. Your ships make an enormous amount of noise. There's just no silence down there. You know, the seas used to be silent down there, but they're not. They're full of, I'm told, they're absolutely full of noise. And one big ship can be heard, I don't know, dozens of kilometers off. What can be done to create a quiet environment for our underwater marine life?
Thank you, Chris. I think that the discussion about decarbonizing shipping and about promoting the uptake of new fuels is also relevant here. Because, I mean, some new fuels can deliver and reduce noise as well. So we shouldn't separate the different environmental objectives, noise from air quality and decarbonization. We're discussing about what ships in the future will look like, and this is why we need to introduce the right incentives as soon as possible. So I wouldn't say that we should focus separately on noise. It's part of the same discussion. It's about new fuels and about new ships, about promoting the uptake of new fuels as soon as possible. And this is why we need funding, we need the right incentives and requirements in place. And we have been promoting, I repeat myself, the creation of different funds at EU level to finance the energy transition, to make in shipping what we did in the power sector in the past, the last 20 years. We don't need to invent the wheel here. We need just to draw the right examples from other sectors, how other sectors did it the last 20 years.
Any comment, John? You on mute.
Sorry, the mute button. I think, well, I mean, not to Sotiris's comment, but, you know, on the fisheries issue, I mean, I think, of course, you know, Bernhard is right. Nobody, you know, I mean, you know, we're not in the business of making enemies, but at the same time, you know, everybody has responsibilities, and, you know, industry is you know, seems to have a lot of political influence and is very, very resistant to change, even when, you know, change is urgently needed, for example, in the situation of bottom trawling. So I think we have to be firm about that. But I would also like, you know, it's you know, it's World Oceans Day today, and, you know, the ocean is a shadow of its former self. You know, before industrial scale fishing took off, the oceans looked a completely different place. You know, the abundance of life there was, you know, just unbelievable. So, you know, it's easy to say, okay, you know, we've got, you know, these stocks are sustainable or they've recovered, but actually they've not gone anywhere near to being back to where they were before we started, you know, fishing industrially. And, you know, you hear a lot of talk about rewilding, you know, on land, but actually what we should also be looking at is rewilding the oceans. And if we were able, through some, I mean, a little mind experiment, I know, but if we were able to just, for example, to transport ourselves back to the moment before, you know, large scale industrial fishing took place, and manage the situation differently, then we would be able to have, you know, a fishing industry fishing at quite high levels without having a significant impact, because the you know, the background abundance would be there. I mean, and hopefully, of course, in this little mind experiment, we wouldn't make all the same mistakes we made last time. So we do it differently. But, you know, it is a serious, you know, there's something, you know, shifting baselines. Most people will have heard of it. The problem at the moment is, you know, we've lived with depleted fish stocks for so long. Our desire to get back to kind of healthy, what healthy means, isn't really natural. It's not at a historic level, and I think we need to keep that in mind, because that's
well, you know, as a former chair of the Fisheries Committee, I could agree with you more. It's not simply a matter of fishing sustainably, so we're not further declining fish stocks. It's a matter of restoring the abundance of fish to give everyone a better future, by better biodiversity, better prospects for the fishing industry. Would you agree, Bernhard? I think
I do agree, and it's kind of in these debates. If you speak for the Commission, you always are at risk a little bit of being pushed into the corner of sort of the pro-fishery lobby and so on. You know from Chris, perhaps from our common background of many years of fisheries, that I've been probably one over the years in my many negotiations in the Council with member states who has pursued pretty aggressively some improvements, and we have seen the results of that. I'd love to go back to the 19th century or earlier, where you had the millions of tons of herring in the North Sea, but when I was young in the 1970s, the human rights internationally, where we take our responsibility, that we can actually improve things. So fish stocks are growing. So this is the kind of spirit with which you should attack all these other problems of marine protected areas, of the effect on the seabed, on other species in the waters, on corals and things like that. And so it's. I mean, when I listen to George Monbiot, he always talks about that. But I think our point of view is, let's start today. We have very little time left. The time is not our friend anymore. So we really have to get cracking on it. We really have to start working on these things, and we have to do it with all the means we have. That's the challenge. Not dreaming of some past, some far past. One last remark on Sotiris' point. On my books, I mean, I heard what he said about the noise, but on my books, there's a very simple solution, and that is drive more slowly, basically. Drive the boats more slowly. I think John will probably agree. It's a logistical issue, honestly. If the industry wants to do that, logistically and economically, I guess it's possible. That would be my take on the noise issue.
Well, time is not on our side either. We've just got a couple of minutes left. The Commission is talking about trying to halve the pollution levels within the next 9 years, which sounds perfectly reasonable to me. I mean, we should just stop polluting. But we also know that things like the nitrates directive was introduced best part of 30 years ago, and as Bernhard has said, nitrates are still pouring into the Baltic Sea and elsewhere. Take the shipping side, Sotiris. What more can be done to reduce the pollution from shipping in ports, for example? I mean, do we just need? Does it need to be a lot more investment in port facilities? You're on mute. No, you're not.
Thank you, Chris.
Very quickly, please.
We have been urging ports to invest more in port reception facilities, for instance, and to make available, and for instance, segregation of waste, to recycle the waste that is delivered segregated at the port. We know that in some ports it is common practice to bring all segregated waste together, and whatever is done on board is lost. It's one of the measures we have proposed, and it has been taken on board by the new Port Reception Facilities Directive. Another challenge is also to build the right infrastructure, the infrastructure needed for the uptake of low and zero carbon fuels. It's one of the challenges that we will need to address in the Fuel EU, the new Fuel EU regulation, and in the revision of the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive.
Sotiris, thank you very much indeed. In fact, I must bring this to a conclusion. Sotiris Raptis from the European Community Shipowners Association, thank you. John Maggs from the environmental NGO Seas at Risk. And Bernhard Friess. Bernhard, you're the man who pulled together the communication on the blue economy. You've heard that the aspirations within that document are widely shared, but the devil is in the detail. You have one hell of a task over the next few months.
Thank you. Well, listen, it's very simple. We aspire to the highest, and we listen to those who urge us to do even more ambitious, and it's right to do so. Huh? Our job is to try to make it happen, but one thing is very clear: we can't do that alone from Brussels. Huh? It's something that we need to do all together. And maybe as a last thought, one thing we really, I think, still need to do better is to bring in the European public, to create ownership of the oceans, to bridge that emotional gap that we have between citizens, European public, and the seas. It's not only about fishing; it's about really empowering every European citizen to be a citizen of the ocean and to take a part in that transition that we need to do.
Thank you. Well, so much more we could have talked about. So many other topics. Haven't even got into plastics or microplastics. Just lost in the density of the issues. Thank you all for taking part. Thank you very much to the Oil and Gas Producers Association for sponsoring this webinar. Good luck, Bernhard. We wish you well in your endeavours.
Thank you.
Goodbye all. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.